She writes, in the earliest parts of the Bible, she writes, quote, in the earliest parts of the Bible, divination is praised as a way to commune with God or divine the future. Okay, where does she say this happens? Oh, Genesis 30:27. Well, let's go there. She's more pathetic in her assessment of the Bible than she is of the paganism. She can't get anything right. You talk about lies. Genesis 30:27. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if thou find favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. Okay, this is about Jacob and Laban. Okay? Okay, now let's see here. Let's go back over this again. Miss Murdoch claims the Bible is favorable towards divination. She writes, in the earliest parts of the Bible, divination is praised in a way to commune with God or divine the future. Genesis 30:27. Did you see anything in that verse I just read? And Laban said, I pray thee, if I found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. Because of Jacob's presence in Laban's family, the Lord was blessing Laban's family. He liked it. How is that divination? You can't, but see, it's almost like she's throwing out verses that don't even apply, hoping you won't look them up. I mean, that is pathetic. Indeed, the word divination comes from the word divine, which is a demonstration that divination was originally considered godly and not evil. This is what she's saying. Divination comes from the word divine, which is a demonstration that divination was originally considered godly and not evil. But that's kind of funny because the Bible totally condemns divination every single time it's mentioned. And the penalty was death in the Old Testament. This is just her opinions. This, too, is an incorrect understanding of the text. Genesis 30:27 records Laban telling Jacob that he has learned through divination that God has blessed him on Jacob's account. But Laban was known to worship other gods. But he doesn't even do that. This guy writing this is even wrong. Laban telling Jacob that he has learned through divination that God is... Where does it say that in verse 27? Maybe it says it in a false version. But it don't say it in the King James. Okay? In fact, it wouldn't even matter because Laban is his own person anyway. He's not God. He's an imperfect man. But it doesn't even say that. This verse does not praise divination, and God has said elsewhere that divination is evil. For example, it is written in Leviticus 19:26. Let's just go there real quick. Leviticus 19:26. Ye shall not eat anything with the blood, neither shall ye use enchantments, nor observe times. Observe times is like astrology, divination, these types of things. Likewise, in Deuteronomy 18, verse 10, Deuteronomy 18, verse 10, we spent a lot of time in this. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, child sacrifice, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter or a witch. All of them are equated on the same level. All of them were the death penalty. Okay? So please don't come back to me and say the Bible condones divination, because it doesn't. It condemns it. I mean, talk about a leap of logic. Miss Murdoch says a lot more in her reference to astrology and the Bible, which this short paper cannot address. However, it is hoped that these few samples are adequate to demonstrate that she is terribly inaccurate in her understanding of the practice of astrology among the ancients, as well as her ineptness in using the Bible to support her view. She can't get either one right. Not even remotely. This woman should be absolutely, totally ashamed of herself. She should crawl under a rock somewhere, beg God to forgive her, and recant and renounce this heresy. Let's go further. Miss Murdoch contends that Jesus, as a crucified Savior, was merely borrowed from other religions. For her, one of the most striking similarities is found with Krishna, the Hindu god. Indeed, her forthcoming book. She's got a new book coming out, everyone, so just make sure you're first in line. Her new forthcoming book, The Sons of God, Krishna, Buddha, and Christ Unveiled. I can hardly wait to miss it. Expounds on this position of Krishna. What about Miss Burnuk's claim that Krishna is so similar to Jesus Christ that Christianity must have borrowed from Hinduism? Dr. Edward Bryant, professor of Hinduism. Now, one thing I love about this guy is he goes right to the professors that live and breathe a particular subject. I'm not saying they're saved, but if anybody's going to know something about it, it's going to be a professor of Hinduism. This guy is Dr. Edward Bryant, professor of Hinduism at Rutgers University, a scholar on Hinduism. As the writing of this paper, he has just translated the Bhagavata Purana, the life of Krishna, for Paraguayan World Classics. So if anybody's going to know about the life of Krishna, this guy's gonna. Okay? And he's currently writing a book to be titled The Quest of the Historical Krishna. When I informed him that Miss Murdoch wrote an article claiming that Krishna had been crucified, he replied, "That is an absolute and complete nonsense. This is a quote. There is absolutely no mention anywhere which alludes to a crucifixion of Krishna." End of quote. He also added that Krishna was killed by an arrow from a hunter who accidentally shot him in the heel. Again, it sounds like repackaged Achilles heel. The sages, he died and ascended. It was not a resurrection. The sages who came there for him could not see it. Then I read a statement by Miss Murdoch from her article, Krishna Crucified, an excerpt from her forthcoming book, Sons of God, Krishna, Buddha, and Christ Unveiled. In it, she states, quote, "It appears Krishna is not the first Indian god depicted as crucified. Prior to him was another incarnation of Vishnu, the avatar named Vitoba, who often had been identified with Krishna." To this, Bryant responds, and this is this Hindu scholar, to this he responds, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Vitoba was a form of Krishna worshipped in the state of Maharashtra, whatever that is. There are absolutely no Indian gods portrayed as crucified. End of quote. He then became indignant and said, quote, "If someone is going to go on the air and make statements about religious tradition, they should at least read a Religion 101 course." End of quote. That's what this Hindu scholar thinks about the person, this Miss Murdoch, who wrote the Christ Conspiracy, which is what the Zeitgeist movie is totally based on. Later, I emailed him regarding the 24 comparisons of Krishna to Jesus, which she has in this thing, which the reader may find in the Christ Conspiracy. He stated that 14 out of the 24 comparisons from Krishna to Christ are completely wrong, and a 15th is partially wrong. What about her 9 that are correct? Especially Krishna's virgin birth, the story of a tyrant who had been the story of the tyrant who had thousands of infants killed, and Krishna's bodily ascension. Benjamin Walker, in his book, The Hindu World, an encyclopedic survey of Hinduism, provides the answer. After tracing similarities related to the birth, childhood, and divinity of Jesus, as well as the late dating of these legendary developments in India, notice I said late dating of these developments in India, there can be no doubt that the Hindus borrowed the tales from Christianity, but not in the same name. Bryant also comments that these parallels come from the Bhagavata Purana and the Haramasa. Bryant believes that the former to be prior to the 7th century AD, yet this is hundreds of years after the Gospel accounts. In other words, all this came after Jesus Christ. They could have easily borrowed from this and plagiarized it. Okay. Of the Haramasa, Bryant is uncertain as to its date. However, most sources seem to place its composition between the 4th and 6th centuries. Again, hundreds of years after the Gospel accounts had been in circulation. An earlier date is entertained by David Mason of the University of Wisconsin, who states there is no consensus on the dating, but he's aware that it may be as early as 2nd century. Even if this early date is accurate, it is still after the Gospels, not before, as Murdoch's thesis requires. Miss Murdoch further claims that Christianity has failed in India because the Brahmins have recognized Christianity as a relatively recent imitation of their much older traditions. To which this Dr. Bryant simply stated, "Stupid comment," end of quote. See, this is a pagan Hindu guy who owns the subject of Krishna better than probably anybody on the planet, saying that this woman is out of her mind, essentially. Her information or research is stupid. Miss Murdoch claims that Christianity has borrowed substantially from Hinduism is without merit. Her claims are without merit. Her claims are false, unsupported, and exhibit a lack of understanding of the Hindu religion. Now, let's talk about her similarities of Christ to Buddha. In addition to Krishna, Miss Murdoch states, cites the similarities between Buddha and Jesus as an example of how